So the Bible is not really a philosophy book with easy to pull out quotes. That's kind of what we want it to be, but that's not what it is. So imagine somebody 1,000 centuries from now quoting Shakespeare as if it were history. Would that be, respectful of Shakespeare? I think not. Although they might learn some interesting things from the stories about human nature. The Bible is rather a debate between people of related but different perspectives, often in story and poetry form, about what life is like and where God is in its midst. And we're not used to seeing it that way. So we pull out little quotes and we think we've got something understood. Actually, many times Christians in our country and in the media use the Bible more like a Ouija board than like the story it is. A little snippet from here, a little snippet from there. And with that, you can make up about anything you want. The Jewish and Christian communities tended to believe, they really all believe that God is involved in the world. Some believe that God had a measure or maybe a lot of control in the world. But there were others who really respected the fact that God was kind of allowing freedom and chance to take place. And God was not trying to control every single thing that happened. But they still believed that God was involved. And all of them seem to believe that it's a mystery. That you can't have one easy answer about this. They also all believe this: that God was going to put the world to right. That God was going to do that in surprising and amazing ways. In Genesis chapter 12, God says to Abraham, and this is kind of the mission statement of the whole people of Israel, by the way, in story form. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. That is the mission statement of the people of Israel. And that, in many respects, is the mission of God: to be a blessing to all the nations of the world. Now, the problem is, you'll note this last sentence: I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Okay? This blessing and cursing business sounds a lot like a God who's in the reward and punishment business, doesn't it? Okay? Except for this. That was probably a story from like 2,400 years ago. Culture changes over 2,400 years. Culture changes over 2 years. That little sentence there is actually a liturgy of accepting someone into your tribe. What God is doing isn't saying, I'm in the reward and punishment business, I'm all into blessing and cursing people. Rather, God is accepting Abraham into his tribe. And so it doesn't mean what we think it means. So the core of the Scripture, the Hebrew Scripture, is this right here. Yes, that God created, but that God sees that the world is hurting, and God wishes to bring healing and wholeness and blessing to it. And that God needs us to participate in that with God. And then we get this beautiful passage at the end of the world. Then I saw the new heaven and the new earth, for the first earth and the first heaven had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them, they will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. This is also the promise of Scripture, which in modern society we turn into Jesus coming back and basically destroying everything and liking it. That's not what it says. That's what people want it to say. But that isn't what it means, in my opinion. And how is God going to bring healing? This is critical. How does God bring healing to us and to a world that is hurting and broken? Because it is hurting and broken, and so are we. Right? What we believe, essentially, about the Christian story, what it seems to say to me and to many other people, is that God chooses to enter into the world and to become vulnerable to it. That God chooses to enter into human vulnerability and pain and loss and grief, and to meet us in that dark, deep space and place and moment. That God chooses to meet us there. Not in a God that's full of power and is going to have winners and losers, but a God who enters into the vulnerability of human life. In Jesus, we see not what God did. Now, we hear a lot about that from a lot of theologies that are out there, especially in the media. That God was so mad at people that God had to send Jesus, beat Jesus up, so that God could possibly accept us. That is a severe diminishment of Jesus. What we see in Jesus on the cross and in the resurrection is not what God did once upon a time to get God over God's forgiveness problem. I mean, basically we turn Jesus into some kind of a family therapist for God, teaching God how to forgive. But it is about what God does. Jesus is the logo of God. He sort of helps us to see that where God is when bad things happen, and where God is with the child underneath the rubble as she dies. She's with the child's mother who's stuck out in the street and is helpless to get to the child. She's with the TV reporter who breaks down after the camera turns off because that camera reporter also has a child. That's where God is. I once said in a funeral sermon for a person that committed suicide by pumping gas into their car, where was God? Well, God was sitting on that vinyl seat with the person that died, in order, maybe not in this life, maybe later, to bring healing to that person and to all of the family who suffered. So human life, then, is embraced by God. Not life as you might want it to be, not life as a philosopher might wish it were, but life as it is. Jesus is, in the midst of this whole vulnerable and beautiful life. And part of I think the suggestion of the Christian faith is that in Jesus and in relationship with Him, we learn to embrace human life better. And notice I don't use the word accept. Accept is kind of a perfectionist thing. But embracing something is different. We see Jesus' embrace of life, and we then begin to be able to embrace life a little bit more fully ourselves. To embrace possibility and promise. To embrace its limitations and its vulnerability. To embrace life and death and new life.